Ever think about how we often picture powerful leaders? It's usually all about grandeur, right? Big palaces, fancy clothes, maybe even a crown or two.
Right, the whole 9 yards.
Well, today we're diving into the story of a leader who kind of flipped that script on its head, Umar ibn al-Khaṭṭāb. Back in 637 CE, he conquers Jerusalem, a huge moment in history. But, get this, Umar was famous for his humility.
Yeah, and that's what makes his story so interesting, right? Like, he wasn't just a conqueror. This is the Caliph we're talking about, the supreme leader in Islam. And he leads in a way that really makes you think about the nature of power.
Okay, so before we get ahead of ourselves, got to set the scene a bit. We're talking
Okay.
Byzantine Empire here, and they've just had a major loss at the Battle of Yarmouk in 636.
Oh, yeah, Yarmouk. Talk about a turning point. That battle basically shattered Byzantine control over Syria and Palestine, left Jerusalem wide open, really.
And Jerusalem wasn't just any city, was it?
No way! Think about it, a place absolutely packed with religious significance for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Capturing Jerusalem, it wasn't just about military strategy. It was way more complex than that.
Right, way more delicate situation. So imagine you're a Muslim general, fresh off a victory, expecting maybe a big parade or something, right? You'd think your leader would make a grand entrance.
For sure, all the pomp and circumstance. But instead, Umar, the Caliph, arrives after traveling for weeks, literally weeks, with like one servant and a camel.
Hold on, seriously.
Yeah, one camel that they were taking turns riding, no less.
Whoa! Taking turns on a camel.
Mhm.
That's not exactly the image of a mighty conqueror, is it?
Not quite. And apparently his own generals were like, maybe a wardrobe change. Something a little more, impressive.
Huh. I can just imagine that conversation.
But Umar was basically like, nah, I'm good. In fact, there's a quote about this whole thing. It goes something like,
Oh yeah, let's hear it.
okay, so it was something like, we were a people of lowliness, and Allah elevated us by Islam. If we seek honor from anything other than what Allah has given us, He will surely humiliate us.
Wow, okay, so definitely not just about appearances for Umar. This is about his beliefs, about walking the walk when it comes to humility.
Mm.
But how did this play out once he's actually in control of Jerusalem? This is a time when conquerors, well, they didn't have the best track record for being, shall we say, gentle.
You're telling me. And that's where it gets interesting. Instead of harsh demands, punishments, Umar sets up something called the Covenant of Umar. And this document, it's seriously impressive for its time.
Okay, so break it down for us what's actually in this covenant. Okay, so break it down for us what's actually in this covenant.
Basically, Umar lays out these guarantees for the Christians in Jerusalem, protection for them, for their property, and this is important for their churches too.
Okay, so they could keep practicing their religion.
Exactly. No interference at all. And there was this really specific rule: no messing with churches, not tearing them down, not damaging them, and definitely no turning them into mosques.
Wow, that is seriously different from what you'd usually expect after a siege in those days.
Totally. And here's the big thing. This covenant of Umar, it wasn't just some temporary thing. This thing became a model for Islamic rule moving forward, like setting a huge precedent for religious tolerance. It basically said, we're here to govern, not to wipe out your culture or your faith.
It's like saying, hey, we can all just get along here.
Pretty much. It's a really remarkable approach for the time.
It is. So we've got this leader, embodies humility, sets up this surprisingly tolerant system.
Yeah.
But did it last? Like, were there ever moments where this approach was challenged? I mean, it had to be tough, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There were definitely challenges. In fact, there's this one story, just a little anecdote about Umar and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that kind of sums up his thinking on all this.
The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, like the most important church in Christianity. Got to hear this.
Right. So, picture this. Umar is there in Jerusalem with Sophronius, the Christian patriarch. They're checking out the city. It's time for prayer. And Sophronius, he's trying to be respectful, invites Umar to pray inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Oh, wow. Okay, now that is a loaded invitation.
Yeah.
What did Umar do? I mean, talk about pressure.
He actually declined politely, of course, but he chose to pray outside the church.
Really? Even though he could have pulled the, hey, I conquered this place card.
He could have, but he didn't. And he had his reasons, too.
I bet. I mean, I got to think people were wondering what was up with that. Did he explain himself?
Yeah, he did. He was worried that if he, the Caliph, prayed inside the church, it'd set this whole precedent for future Muslims. Like, down the road, they could point to that moment and say, well, Umar prayed here, so we can totally turn this into a mosque.
Thinking ahead.
Exactly. So by praying outside, he was basically protecting the church in the long run.
Wow. Talk about considering the bigger picture. And get this, to mark the whole thing, what ends up getting built on that very spot outside the church?
The Mosque of Umar, right?
Got it. It's like this permanent reminder of his commitment to like interfaith respect and understanding. Even all these centuries later, it's this testament to his vision. I mean, it's pretty amazing when you think about it, this seemingly small action where he chose to pray has huge ripple effects.
Absolutely.
It really makes you think sometimes leadership is as much about what you choose not to do as what you actually do.
Totally agree. And the coolest part is this wasn't some isolated thing. After the conquest, Jerusalem actually thrives under Muslim rule. Like you see Jews, Christians, Muslims all living together, doing business, worshiping.
Seriously. No way that's true everywhere.
It wasn't perfect, obviously. I mean, there were going to be tensions, right? But for the most part, Umar's whole vision of a multi-faith city, it actually worked.
That is incredible. Especially if that time period you've got all these huge upheavals going on, conquest, forced conversions.
Exactly. And here's Umar in Jerusalem doing things totally different.
So it's not just about Jerusalem, his way of doing things there. It became the model for the whole expanding Islamic empire.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
here's proof you could be successful militarily and religiously tolerant at the same time.
Okay, so what happens next? Umar's conquered Jerusalem. He's put this surprisingly tolerant system in place.
Yeah.
Does he, like, retire to a palace somewhere?
You'd think, right, kick back and relax. But nope. Umar, ever the pragmatist, he packs up, heads back to Medina, the capital of this rapidly growing Islamic empire.
Not to, like, put his feet up and relax.
No, not this guy. He's got this massive empire to run, right? And he was serious about getting it right, making sure resources were good, setting up legal systems, all with that same focus on fairness and justice that he lived by in Jerusalem.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. A leader actually living by those values makes you wonder if his whole approach, this humility thing, if that could actually work for leaders today.
It's a good question, especially these days, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, Umar's story, it reminds you, being a leader, it's not about grabbing power for yourself. It's about using whatever power you have to help people, to make things more just.
Exactly. And he wasn't all talk either. I mean, the guy walked the walk literally with the camel. But really, this whole deep dive has been amazing, just seeing how much impact one person can have just by leading with humility, by respecting others.
Definitely powerful stuff. And it reminds us history is full of surprises. We always hear about the conquerors who were ruthless, right? But then you have Umar showing there's another way to do it, strength and humility. They're not opposites.
Makes you think, for sure.
It does. And that's the beauty of like digging into these stories from the past. It's not just dates and names, It's those deeper lessons about leadership, about faith, about how powerful respect can be.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Umar's conquest of Jerusalem. Hope you found it as fascinating as we did.
It's been great exploring this with you.
And until next time, keep asking questions and keep on exploring.